welcome to, oh, hang on. Hi, everybody. There we go. Now I'm unmuted. Here we go. Let's start our villains class. This is a ScriptCamp one-off free sort of public course that might just give you a preview of some of the kinds of stuff that we do at ScriptCamp. So feel free to follow along. Click next to my name where it says the word live, and you can follow the video presentation as well. So make sure to keep your mics muted during class unless I call on anyone to unmute, which I will do. We'll have a little time for some activities and participation-based things in today's class. Let's get going. So before we get started, always make sure that you check your audio, microphone, background noise, and things like that. There will be some tips and tricks for how to diagnose problems with that if you're struggling there. So you can always just rewind to an earlier point in the stream to look at these slides here and get some suggestions on how to fix audio problems. What is ScriptCamp? We are a screenwriting community that is focused on taking you from idea to more polished draft. And we have lots of free classes, events, and workshops. And we also have these paid VIP member classes and boot camps and writers' labs as well. Here's a little bit about me. I've been writing full-length scripts for about 11 years now. Have been signed and working in Hollywood since 2017 when I placed in the Launchpad contest top 10 and got signed for the first time. Since then have been featured in a couple other lists and things which you can see on this slide here, and have a thriller script set up with a production company in town. I teach the boot camps and also the weekly writers labs here. And we're adding new topics, so I won't be teaching all the boot camps forever. We just recently had Morgan Smalley teaching playwriting. And we're going to have additional teachers for just new classes and new fields of study as we add them. But there's just a little info about me. Let's talk about the boot camp. We are going to go from idea to first draft in most of these. Today is not a boot camp. This is just a sort of one-off class, but maybe could give you some inspiration for the Antagonist for your boot camp script. If you wanted to write a complete script in just 8 weeks, you can follow along with the feature course or our TV course, which is about to start up. 6 weeks for the TV pilot, 6 weeks for the stage play, meaning you'll have to review the videos for that one, and then we have 4 weeks for the rewrite, and 4 weeks for Pitch Bootcamp, which just finished pretty recently. So let's look at the schedule for our feature bootcamp, which is currently in progress. We're on week 3 of this one, so you can technically join whenever you want, but you'll get more value out of it if you just have a little more time to get the first few classes down and just make sure that you have all the groundwork and skills finished. So we had our first class on the 22nd, and that was focused on refining log lines. We then moved into outlining broad strokes of the entire story on the 29th, and we went into scene cards, which is a full paragraph for every scene in the whole movie on last week's meeting, which was just a couple days ago. We are moving into week 4 of this course now, but if you want to write a feature, you just have to wait until the class cycles back around to the first class again. So that would be after the week of 6-3. So 6-10 will be, that's the final meeting of the class, and then after 6-10, that is when our cycle resets and a new feature camp will begin. So, yep, you can see just an overview of how that works there. Here's how to enroll. You can go to scriptcamp.net/classes and buy a course on its own. So you could buy just a bootcamp if you wanted to. Or you can get the free trial of the $49 unlimited membership, which gets you access to all classes, all labs, all events, and just everything. So scriptcamp.net/membership. You can see what a couple of the different membership options include here. $5 a month does include these weekday classes like this one right now, and that's going to be 8 total classes a month, plus video library, links to recordings of other classes. It will not include the Writers Lab or boot camps, though, which you can get with the unlimited, and it again comes with 2 weeks free trial. So feel free to review this slide if you want to get a sense of what some of the membership options will include. Let's look at today. Brand new class, never been taught before. We have a bunch of things to talk about. We'll go into antagonists. What are they for? How do you create them? What structural roles are they going to fulfill? How do you make them really memorable and really strong characters? And essentially the highlight of your movie. So we'll start by talking about just favorite villains and why some of these villain characters are memorable to us, or why they are the highlights of their own story in whatever way. And villains as the torchbearer for theme will also be something we talk about, so your villain will be a major part of how you construct the central dramatic argument of the entire movie. We then have villain, protagonist, and anti-hero, which are sort of riffs on the idea of villains in the first place. These terms hero and villain kind of can trip people up because they might start to think, well, my protagonist isn't a hero. normally, in this case, what I will normally do is just use hero to mean protagonist and villain to mean antagonist, regardless of the moral judgment of what they're actually doing. But in this case here, we can see some versions where a, quote, villain might in fact be your protagonist. So this is an anti-hero or villain protagonist in which we're following a villainous character as our sort of central hero for whatever reason. So we'll go into some ways to do that. We're getting a lot of background noise from someone's mic. So if you guys wouldn't mind keeping your mics muted unless you've been called on for the class, that'd be great. Thank you, guys. Let's look at... what else do we have? Oh, yeah. So we'll go into antagonist-driven versus protagonist-driven stories, tiers of villain, henchmen, mooks, and faceless hordes, domains and limitations. I have a slide just on horror and thriller villains just because this is my area of expertise, so I have some special tips when designing them specifically. And then we'll have an exercise where we will come up with a protagonist for some theoretical stories and then come up with a villain to match and counteract them and serve as their foil or counterpoint. Proximity will also just be a whole series of slides we do. So how far away is your villain from your hero, and how often and in what capacity are they able to interact is a big question you have to ask. So we'll look at hero and villain as friends, maybe villains that are subservient to higher evil, ones that are encountered occasionally when dramatically appropriate, the sort of far away, distant villain that we don't encounter very much. And we'll just look at some different archetypes and tips and tricks that you can use when designing villains who operate at different optimal distances. Let's get into it. Hopefully you guys can all hear and see okay. If you're watching on one of our streaming platforms like Twitch, Twitter, or YouTube, you can still comment and we'll be able to see them, but you can also come join our Discord discussion. So you can leave comments and questions in our chat, which is on the left-hand side of your Discord window under the tab called Villain Class. That's at the bottom of the discussion folder, so feel free to weigh in with questions and comments in that chat channel during class, and I will stop and take them every once in a while when appropriate. And also sometimes I might just say, go ahead and unmute and just feel free to speak out. Okay, let's look at antagonists as the highlight of the movie, and we'll look at this very first question. Who are some of our favorite villains and why? What makes them memorable? I've put a couple of just random examples of some that I liked on the screen. I noticed pretty quickly 2 of them were Stephen King characters. Stephen King, fantastic at coming up with villains. And I was trying to figure out what kind of trend exists behind all the different antagonists that I personally am really into. I think that having a really clear different side of them is something that I'm really attracted to. If we take characters, everyone from Mr. Freeze here, I think Mr. Freeze is among the more interesting of comic book villains because he's doing everything, all of his villainous stuff he's doing for the very clear and sympathetic reason that his fiance or his wife is sick with some almost incurable disease, and he has her frozen, and he's like a cryogenics engineer who ends up freezing her in like a block of ice, basically. And all of the villainous schemes that he perpetrates are in service of getting money to fund more research to figure out how to save her. He doesn't actually have an agenda to destroy the city or to team up with... He's not trying to team up with the Joker or Poison Ivy or any of these people to take down Gotham or to do any of... He doesn't share any of the other villains' motivations. In fact, his goal is pretty much entirely compassionate, and you could say self-centered in the sense that it's his wife, but he's trying to help someone else. And I think that puts him at a really interesting contrast. He's like a foot separated from each of the other crazy villains in Gotham, except it gives him such a good reason for doing it that it makes him just as ruthless as any of the others, because he's doing it for love. And I think having a villain doing what they do for a really good reason is just a really nice shortcut to making us care more about them. You could look at other characters here. I have Harry Waters from In Bruges, who is the main villain of that movie, who's also has this other really strong side to him. Yes, he's a really violent, psychopathic criminal, but he has an extremely strong set of principles and a really clear code of honor that he follows unflinchingly, without any hesitation. And he thinks that everyone else should live by their own sort of code, too. So having that other side, that, although on the surface they might seem to be just any other gun-toting criminal, you can see that by having something about them that will never change, something motivating why they do what they do, having some sympathetic or earnest reason why they are taking part in these evil acts, I think all of these things are going to be something that I at least look for in interesting villainous characters. You can see hints of those in the other ones that I've chosen here too, but I'd like to hear from the group, what are some of your favorite villains, and specifically why? What traits do we look for, or what elements do we look for that make a villain compelling or memorable?
My, I wouldn't say that I have someone specific. I guess if I had to choose one, it'd have to be Darth Vader because of how three-dimensional he is. His character is like full circle.
Hmm.
If you're looking for a female villain, go with Cruella de Vil. Glenn Close's portrayal of her gave Cruella a very extensive wardrobe, which are probably the only highlights I like about the live-action version of 101 Dalmatians and its sequel.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. I mean, clearly there was something memorable enough about that character that they decided to totally reboot the franchise with her as the sort of lead character as well. So like that's why that what was it's just
If you're
most
looking
relevant,
for,
right?
yeah. And then, of course, there are a couple of villains who are intended to be more hateable than the actual threat. Case in point, Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter and Chifu from Mulan. They're both government officials, and Umbridge is like completely is an extreme disciplinarian, and Chifu is a total sexist. And the reason why they exist is because they're living proof that the Huns and the Death Eaters don't run a monopoly of awful people.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point, and so they fit into that category of villains that are sort of subservient to a higher evil, or they're like a sidekick to the evil, or they're just like acting against the protagonist's best interest, even though they're not the big bad for whatever reason. So yeah, there's lots of different styles of villain that we can do. Anyone who's opposing the main character's goal in whatever way, we can look at as an antagonist, even if the antagonist is their love interest or something like that, or their best friend. For the purposes of one story, whoever is opposing the main character's goal is our sort of villain. So yeah, those are some more great examples there. Darth Vader, interesting one too, because I think we don't really see for a couple movies how three dimensional that character in fact is. In the first one, we learn almost nothing about him, except for a couple lines about his backstory. But as the franchise sort of becomes about developing that character more, and it, in a very Greek tragedy kind of way, becomes about the downfall of a good person. How does a good person become the lord of all evil is sort of a big question of those first six movies. Anyone else?
Mm-hmm.
Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men.
Okay, why is that a very memorable character or compelling villain for you?
Uh, for one, apparently his clinical psychologist identified him as an accurate portrayal of a psychopath.
Okay, sure, that
But it's
helps.
it's not it's not just that he's unidimensionally like similar to say someone like Harry from Bruges in that they pursue their sort of moral philosophical beliefs to an absolute end. It's also what he represents in this sort of changing world where the sort of just trying to have like this small town morality where everything is consistent and simple is becoming incredibly muddled like by like the drug trade. But it's not just the drug trade, it's also the implications it has for like the wider society. Like, as you know, the story begins in the early 80s, and early 80s is also ushering of Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan is probably like it like all these subtle inferences you can put in, because he was obviously responsible for a lot of like CIA sort of stuff. And there's like this implicit shadiness in society. And I think yeah, we're perturbed by him, but at the same time, we're not thinking like, oh, he's like a two-dimensional villain. We're also thinking, you know, this this has like people like this exist in some way or form. Maybe not like him exactly, but with who just don't care about conventional mores of social morality.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of Cormac McCarthy and Coen Brothers villains as well often will sort of represent some kind of philosophical concept as opposed to just being someone trying to stop your character from doing something. They represent like the worst of humanity, or they might have this almost alien, divine evil kind of hanging over them, like the villain in Raising Arizona, who's almost like a rider of the apocalypse, is what he sort of feels like. So yeah, a lot of what both of those storytellers do, and obviously Coen Brothers adapted this Cormac McCarthy movie, so this is a good example of this. They will stand in for some sort of grander idea, or they're like just like almost like an ideological servant of some grander idea. The Judge from Blood Meridian is another good example of this, or Lorne Malvo from Fargo. They feel like they exist as far like within the confines of the story, but also sort of outside of it because they are an idea that pervades all of human life in some kind of way. So yeah, more good examples there. Does one more person want to weigh in and tell us about some villain that they are a fan of? CC says Jack Nicholson in The Departed, and Frank Lucas. Is that a different character from The Departed?
I'd say Wesley Snipes probably from, and this is a funny one, from Demolition Man.
Okay.
I loved it. I mean, because he was funny. You know, there's other villains, especially the one from someone just mentioned from No Country for Old Men.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Sugar, definitely. Yes. But as far as funny ones, I like him. I'm sorry, he was just hilarious to me.
Yeah.
I just love watching.
There's a lot of personality, right? And an attitude. I think a lot of these things will be elements that can make characters more memorable, even if they are still threatening and scary in some way. Like we could take Freddy Krueger as another example of characters that perhaps started more serious, but over a couple movies started having more attitude and more flair for the dramatic and just saying funny stuff that they kind of they find a different way to appeal to the audience beyond just being an intimidating evil presence. CC says Frank Lucas, from American Gangster. I think my trend is the story of the villain as the main character. Oh yeah, villain protagonist. That's absolutely a way that you can take it as well. Scorsese movies do this all the time, so very much an option and something to consider. The villain does not have to be like the point of view that we don't get. We can in fact center the whole story around a villainous type of person if you want. Lots of good ways of doing that. So yeah, good answers here, and I think that having different dimensions to the villains is something that we're coming back to as something that is keeping us interested in them and making them feel like not just some made up fake flat character. Having more than one side to them, some interesting reason why they're doing what they do, having something in their backstory that motivates them or makes it clear why they're acting in the way that they do, or just makes them compelling in some way because they're interesting, they're fascinating, they're more competent, they're scarier, they're funnier, they are, quote, better than us. It's the same reasons that we like any kinds of character. Except villains in particular, I think something that we should always keep in mind is that they should outmatch the hero. Because if the hero is going head-to-head with someone who is weaker than them, then the story is inherently a little bit less dramatic. So in designing a villain to match up with your hero, we're looking for someone that comes from... Well, I'll get more into this pretty soon, but someone that reflects your hero in some kind of way, perhaps an element of shared backstory. They're either like the same as the hero, or like they come from the same place, or they might come from the opposite place as the hero, so as to showcase some kind of ideological divide between them. There's lots of little tricks like that we'll get into more pretty soon, and a lot more specifics on just like how do we choose the traits of the villain in correspondence or in conversation with the traits that we've chosen for the hero. So let's go into our first couple slides, and we'll sort of smoothly transition into more on that topic. The villain should really kind of be the highlight of the movie in a lot of ways. I recently saw this straight-to-streaming fantasy movie where the hero is seemingly at the villain's mercy after having fought him on the side of a cliff. The villain picks up the hero and starts spinning him around like Super Mario 64 versus Bowser style, getting ready to throw him off the cliff, and then the villain gets dizzy and trips and falls and dies. And this is portrayed as a woof, you just barely got out of that one kind of moment for the main character. But what's the actual effect of something like that happening? The villain falling due to their own incompetence just makes the hero seem lame for having defeated them. Fighting an incompetent or unformidable opponent does not make us like your hero more at all. And the formidability of a villain makes one of the best metrics for the hero's progress. The hero's victory over a villain should not come through incompetence or through random chance of any kind, but it should act as a signpost that the hero has transformed throughout the story. And we have some more comments in the chat. It looks like Logan has weighed in with Nurse Ratched, Magneto, and John Doe. Those are, some more pretty well-known villains from big movies there. CC says Reverse Flash. I don't even know who that is exactly, but I'm guessing it's sort of an evil counterpart to the Flash, because doesn't every comic book character have some evil counterpart? But yeah, that's sort of, comic books take that idea of the reflection of the hero and make it really literal sometimes. Sometimes it's like, he's Superman, but he wears black and he's got red glowing eyes, so you know he's evil because he doesn't wear blue or have he's got a goatee, so he's the evil version. Something like that. But yeah, that's a pretty common principle in villain design. And what do I mean by this idea of the defeating the villain acts as a signpost that the hero has transformed throughout their story? Well, there I am referring specifically to the idea that the villain usually should not be someone that the main character can defeat until they have kind of learned the, quote, lesson of the movie or realized the central theme of the story. The break into 3 is almost always we want that to be a moment where the hero pushes forward to take one last desperate swing at the villains or at the antagonistic force, using what they've gained or learned along this specific journey. And that moment shouldn't be something that they can accomplish if not for everything that we have seen so far. And the villain is usually standing in. They're like the main obstacle that is in the hero's way, and defeating them will be the main proof, the main signpost, or the main metric that the hero has completed their internal transformation. And now that they've done that, only now that they've done that, can they defeat the villain. That shows that the journey of the movie is kind of over. So, how can we think of the villain as the counterpart to the hero in a little more of a realistic, organic way than just they have a goatee and an eye patch, so we know that's the evil version? The villains can often be a fallen hero that represents what our protagonist might have become if the backstory had been different, or what they still might become if they just succumb to the dark side in whatever form that takes. So the conflict and contrast between those two things can encompass the central dramatic argument for the entire movie. We can see a couple example characters from different stories here. We have Coraline and her other mother on the left. We have Killmonger, the villain off Black Panther, in the middle. And here we have Belloc, who is the villain from Indiana Jones, and the, the Raiders of the Lost Ark. And that quote, I think, is that we have from Belloc here is just a really clear demonstration of this idea. And to the extent that a lot of movies used to sort of spell this thing out a lot more. I think we've all heard this speech that goes, "You're not so different, you and I. We both come from this and this, but there was one point that caused us to divide." And that's because the hero is sort of showing like the opposite side of some kind of coin to your hero. Does anyone want to talk about one of these three characters and how they represent the opposite side of what the main character is themselves, or the opposite of what they're looking for, or just they act as some kind of dark reflection of the protagonist?
If I recall correctly, Killmonger is, he represents, I guess, interventionism, but also globalism, while Black Panther is more isolationism, because they have better technology.
Yeah, exactly. So can you maybe just explain just if pretending someone has
not seen
the movie before,
they have like the
same
terms. They have like the same background or something, except like I think they had like, I can't remember if they were cousins or something like that.
I believe
but
they
anyway,
are, yeah.
Anyway, his father like left Killmonger in the US instead, and he basically like had to survive by himself, while Black Panther grew up in the fictional country of Wakanda.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like also kind of like Magneto and Professor X, there's kind of like real world connotations examples with like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X,
mm-hmm.
where it's like they care about the same issue, but their opinions, and like they even care about the same group in the issue, but their opinions are like wildly different.
Yeah,
right?
So the fact that they want the same thing makes them an interesting pairing of hero and villain, definitely, because the divide then comes down to ideology and how should we accomplish this same thing. That is sort of all of that is going to make this conflict between your hero and villain a conversation about the idea that like the central theme of your movie. Because one of them thinks that we should approach this problem that exists in real life in this way. One of them thinks we should approach that problem that way. So what is it? In Black Panther, T'Challa is the main character's name, right? So he and his cousin were separated at birth. T'Challa lives in this like basically sci-fi utopia in this very secluded country called Wakanda, whereas his cousin goes and lives in the U.S. and does not have a great upbringing. And now that they're older, Killmonger is trying to take down Wakanda because he's like basically saying they shouldn't have access to all that secret sci-fi magic tech and stuff. That should be, I can't remember if he wants it to belong to everybody or what his exact plan is, but his reasoning comes from a point of like making total sense. You shouldn't be able to hoard all of that great stuff, all that amazing technology, if people would be able to benefit from getting it. You mentioned Magneto. Magneto says we can't trust humans not to exterminate the mutants. So that's why we need to wage preemptive war against them. Magneto grew up during the Holocaust and has seen exactly how like industrialized racist evil can be, and how effective it can be, and how much it can like devastate an entire population. So we can see that the really good villains will have a point about something. And the fact that they are right about something kind of proves like it's better to have your villain be right about something and then force the hero to reconcile with the truth, rather than have them be some kind of, what do we say, like a cardboard cutout villain that represents, I don't know, they might just represent a shallow version of that thing in real life. So like we might look at, for example, I don't know, you have a character that is going to represent for us all of the evil of the prison system, right? He's going to be the meanest jail warden ever. So we could make it so that he is very clearly on his face evil. He's like, I'm mean to prisoners because I want to be, and because it's fun for me to be evil and to throw people in solitary for years at a time and to beat them up with my club. Or you could take that same character and give him motivations that sort of make sense. And you're like, well, if somebody is in my prison, then they must have done something really bad. And they're going to go out and recommit a crime unless they get the message that the crime is wrong. So like if we can build some kind of logical system for the villain that makes sense, you can always make a stronger character because they're coming from some kind of logical foundation. And by having a character that seems like a fake version of that idea that you're trying to take down, it will be less effective than if you make them raise valid points and force the hero to address those valid points. All right, so yeah, we have a couple just quotes here. What does Coraline's other mother say? Coraline is bored at her new house that her parents just moved to. Her parents don't pay any attention to her, and she feels like they don't quite express affection enough. So she crawls through a portal into this weird, eerie other version of her house where her parents have these buttons for eyes, but they're super nice, and they are super affectionate, and they dote on her all the time, and they go out of their way to make her favorite desserts every day and play games, and like they do everything that her regular parents don't. But what is this quote here? This is from the book, actually. She said, "You know that I love you," and despite herself, Coraline nodded. It was true. The other mother loved her, but she loved Coraline as a miser loves money, or as a dragon loves its gold. So here in this case, it's the villain is not necessarily a direct one-to-one reflection of the hero, but it is in some ways the answer to everything that the hero thinks that she is looking for. And she is like on the surface, this is the version of her mother that she would want. But if we look a little deeper, we see the insidious parts of that too. So this character sort of, instead of just being like a mirror version of our hero, shows some it like takes the main hero's conflict or the main hero's main goal and draws into question the very basics of it. So she is like, imagine that you actually got what you wanted. How creepy and bad would that actually be? So she's like an extreme, exaggerated version. She's like the antithesis of everything that the main character thinks that she wants. And I think that we've gone enough into these other examples. You can see in Balak's quote here, "You and I are very much alike. Archaeology is our religion, but we've both fallen from the purer faith. Our methods have not differed as much as you pretend. It would only take a slight It would only take a slight nudge to make you like me, to push you out of the light." So that's just that sort of "you're not so different, you and I, Mr. Bond" kind of things, all spelled out. But you can see why that has become a cliche, and why that audiences are just interested by that, because having the heroes and villains relationship be a conversation between two philosophical ideas in and of itself is just a really effective storytelling tool. Any questions so far before we get into protagonist-driven versus antagonist-driven stories? All right, let's get into this topic. So we can look at any story as being primarily driven by the protagonist or driven by the antagonist. So we're asking who's primarily making choices, enacting plans, and whose actions require a response from the other one. And sometimes that might go back and forth a little bit. Sometimes one of them might have the upper hand to begin with, and that might shift as a dynamic throughout the story. Thrillers especially are really contingent on that idea of the power balance shifting back and forth between who has their hands on the one gun at any given time, sort of thing. But we can broadly look at who is trying to uphold the status quo and who is trying to change it. So first example, in superhero stories, do we think those are primarily driven by the protagonist or the antagonist? Who's trying to uphold the status quo in a most archetypal superhero stories?
Antagonist driven.
Yeah, they're antagonist driven for the most part, and that's because I would say the hero is usually the one trying to uphold the status quo. In what way is that the case? In what way is the hero trying to uphold the status quo in superhero movies?
Because usually the villain is going around messing with people or killing people or robbing stuff or whatever you have you, or making a new chemical that will turn everyone into lizards.
Right.
Actually, so and the hero's like, well, let's not do that.
Yeah, the hero
And
says, let's try to just keep life going as it was before. And the villain is the one saying, no, I'm going to try to change that by turning everyone into a lizard or whatever it is that their evil plan is. They're the ones that are enacting their schemes on a stable society, and the heroes are the ones trying to get things back to normal. And so, to that end, the heroes have to be a little bit inherently responsive in these stories. That doesn't mean that you still can't keep the character active, though. How can you keep a superhero character active if everything that they're doing relies on the villain's plans before they can act?
Can I speak on that?
Go ahead.
Or do you have to raise your hand?
Nope, you can unmute. Go ahead.
I was saying, I remember in the Sherlock Holmes movies, the ones with Robert Downey Jr., he was very active, but he was kind of like trying to solve the mystery. So it's like he's active trying to figure out the case, So I guess that's a way to keep the protagonist very active, trying to solve a mystery, trying to figure out a solution to a problem in some way, shape, or form, and um, hopefully it's done by them being the ones who are the ones capable of doing it. So if anybody could solve it, the protagonist they don't have such a significant role as unless they're the ones with the skills or the abilities to actually bring justice.
Right. So yeah, that's some good points there. I think that if the heroes have a large task to deal with or like a big mystery to deal with, then they have to stay active in solving it, because they have to still make plans and like figure out, well, which crime scene am I going to go to first? How am I going to follow up on this clue? How am I going to take this to the next clue and like follow this down the chain of things like data points that can get me to the ultimate villain? Somebody in the comments just mentioned the most recent Batman movie, in which he's very reactive. Yeah, I found him to be very, very reactive in the new Batman movie too. Mostly because it would be the Riddler commits one crime, Batman shows up and gets the clue and has to try to solve it. Riddler commits another crime, Batman shows up and has to decipher the clue. And it just sort of felt a little repetitive for me and didn't really feel like the main character was driving the story. I think in the case where you have like they're getting fed, like the hero's getting fed a trail of clues or breadcrumbs or whatever, sometimes having more than one at once can like open up options for them and not just feel like, oh, we have to wait for the villain to do something now before we can have another exciting scene. So maybe a bit of a broader mystery or different angles by which that the main character can attack this same problem. You can also have the hero do all kinds of things that are getting them into the place where they would be able to address the problem. Having the hero learn how to figure out how to use their powers, or stop a few street level crimes so that they can get better at being a hero. These are things that are going to start to make them into the kind of person that could take on the villain, even if it's not like every single scene is them going head to head. So yeah, you must find ways of keeping your hero active, even if it's a villain-driven story. That's actually one of the big challenges of writing villain-driven stories, is making sure that your protagonist still feels as if they're primarily in the driver's seat of that narrative. How about horror?
Antagonist, I'd say again.
Yeah, again, mostly antagonist-driven, and why is that?
Because usually someone trying to kill you or inflict torture on you is changing the status quo, and you're not really trying to do anything.
Yeah, most heroes' goals in horror movies are kind of just get back to normal life, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Just return things to how they were, and fix the problem. Yeah, exactly. So the villains are the ones that are coming into their lives and shaking things up, and the heroes now have to find ways to adapt and find ways to counterattack. So with the question in the chat, how would you fix this? your main character taking the reins and shifting the tide of that battle in whatever way is a really key way you can do this. Especially, we see this in home invasion movies all the time, I think, which you'd think on their face are very villain-driven. The villains are breaking the window in the bottom, in the dining room. We need to go and board it up. The villains are sneaking in through the upstairs attic. We have to go fight them off. Whatever it is like that. But that moment where the hero sort of says, no, I'm going to be the one in charge now. I'm going to start setting traps around the house. Like, you guys should see You're Next if you haven't seen it, which is just like, in terms of home invasion slasher type movies, that is one which becomes very protagonist driven around the sort of 35-minute mark when the hero realizes, oh, wait, I'm the only one that can stop these guys. I'm going to have to enact plans and turn the tables on these villains. So turning the tables is going to be like one of the main ways that you can keep the heroes more active. Another main way that you can do this is just find things that the hero can do that can build up their forces or allow them to take on the villain better, even if not every scene is going to require them to go head to head. So like you can have very active scenes if the hero has to cement an alliance with somebody else. So they have to make friends, or they have to negotiate or network or get people on their side. Or they might have to do some training, or they might have to upgrade their equipment, or any of these things that you can do that can be very active and can turn your hero into the kind of person that they will need to be to take on the antagonist. What about heist movies? Here, are they protagonist or antagonist driven?
Protagonist driven.
I think, yep, I heard two people once, but yes, protagonist driven. And why is that?
Usually it's the protagonist wants something and they see stealing as a way to get it.
Yeah, so the status quo is something is very well guarded. Something is in a vault, or a bunch of money is in a safe, or something like that. And the heroes are like, we have to come up with the plans, and we have to be the ones that are very actively finding a way to get this thing. It's much easier to keep your protagonists active in this sort of genre. But not every genre is as clear. Like, what about romance? Is that antagonist or protagonist driven? I don't know. It feels like it could kind of go either way, especially if you're looking at the love interest as the antagonist, which sometimes is the case, or sometimes there's something else that's sort of keeping them apart, or perhaps some element of society that's keeping them apart, or something like that. So you really have to, this is going to vary a lot from genre to genre. There's not one right answer to this, but you do have to make sure, even if we are sort of waiting on the villain to do something, to give your hero something to do, we should still be giving your hero smaller goal-based sequences that can still feel like we are achieving this sense of progress and like building up to some kind of payoff, even if it's not going to be, they're not going to be the ones who are, quote, taking the lead in every scene. The way that they respond to things should at least be very active. I'm just going to give a quick example for that. It's like, well, yes, we do have to wait for the bank robbery to start as the catalyst for the story for the cops to go and stop the bank robbery. But then your main character sees one of the villains rushing off down an alleyway, and they say, I'm going to go cut them off by navigating this maze of alleys. I'm going to make a plan to go respond to this threat. So even in responding to things, your heroes can still be forced to use their creativity to change their tactics and to show off their different abilities in different arenas. Let's look at villain protagonists, which somebody mentioned earlier. So what are some good examples of villain protagonists? I have here Jordan Belfort from Wolf of Wall Street. We have Maleficent from that movie, and we have Lou Bloom from Nightcrawler. Any other good examples you guys like of villain protagonists? We were talking about Scorsese earlier. Plenty of examples there.
I have a question. I'm not really sure. Is in Amadeus, is Mozart or Salieri the protagonist? It's Salieri, right?
I haven't seen it in a super long time. I've only seen it once a long time ago. What do you think?
I think it's Salieri just because he's narrating. I'm gonna assume, and he's at the beginning and the end.
That's usually gonna be indicative of who the protagonist of the story is. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess he's like a petty villain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But do you think that is it set up in such a way that he is very outmatched by Mozart, would you say?
Yes.
Right. So that's a big indicator that the one that we're supposed to be following, when we're given a choice, we follow our sympathy, don't we? So we're going to empathize with the character that has the underdog, the one that has the harder hill to climb. So also look at who do we start with, like who does the story open on? Who does it frame this as being about? That's usually going to be who our protagonist is, even if they are kind of a villain. Yes, exactly. Who are some other good examples of villain protagonists that you guys like?
Tom from 500 Days of Summer.
Okay. Yep. That's. Oh yeah. Romance is not usually my genre, so I don't know quite as much about it. But I have seen that one a long time ago. But yeah, in that one, I guess maybe not everybody would agree that he's kind of the villain. But why, in your words, would you classify that character as the villain of that story, and why do you think that works?
He does a lot of self-sabotage throughout the movie.
Mm-hmm.
He is his own worst enemy, to be frank. You know what I mean? Like, the way that he takes things, the way that he perceives things, he is the villain of his own story.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the audience might perceive, Summer at points to be the villain.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, well, I have a slide on this in a couple slides as well, which is sometimes your main character and like their negative traits sort of end up being the antagonist of the movie. Dramas in particular are a really good opportunity to find a way that your character can be both the hero and the villain. Like, it's always going to be their negative traits they're struggling with that get in their way and end up working against them. So, what are some things that we should know about villain protagonists? This is just the more evil character getting the sympathetic POV. It's not always necessary for a villain to be super sympathetic to get this trope. It just means that we'll be primarily following them and understanding their motivations and what makes them tick and why they're doing what they're doing. They need to be a villain whose otherwise morally reprehensible actions are not really glossed over or justified within the context of the story. We sometimes just see the story straight up from the villainous point of view. In a comedy, these guys usually will go down in flames by the end. Whether or not that's going to be a downer ending will usually just depend on what they did to get there along the way and how entertaining their sort of karmic reward is. Whether or not that they actually learn anything from that remains, very, very variable and remains to be seen. If you look at Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the main characters are villain protagonists who usually have a downer ending, and usually their schemes go up in flames. Do they actually learn or grow from this? No, not really. Sometimes these characters do a turn and end up becoming heroic by the end, or their status as a main character. Just, it means that they will more likely often end with them winning than the villain would win in most other stories. Usually the villain is not going to win. It's like 85% of stories, the villain does not actually win the main central conflict. In stories like this, it becomes much more common, and it's a lot of the fun comes from how we're watching a story where the villain wins in a way that follows their POV and sort of tells us why they're doing what they're doing and makes us understand them a lot more. So yeah, this can really work. And sometimes you can find this question of, are they going to become good or not, sort of ends up encompassing the main dramatic arguments for the entire story. If we look at The Wolf of Wall Street, for example, it's like at the end of all of this, is he going to be punished for his horrible actions throughout the whole story? No, as we find out at the very end, he goes to jail, but he goes to sort of rich people jail. And the last shot of the movie is just craning up from him playing tennis in jail, having a great time. So it sort of shows, no, he didn't learn anything from this. The system or world that got him to this point is broken in some way and needs to change. And this is just, life's kind of like that. Stories based on real life more often will have endings kind of like that. So yeah, you can totally do this thing as the villain protagonist, and some genres even give you this opportunity to make the hero and villain the same person, like I was just talking about. So their attempt to overcome their negative traits represents the movie's primary conflict. This is the kind of man versus self thing that we talk about, if we look at these elemental types of story conflicts, we have man versus man, which is, outdated terminology or whatever, but human versus human, human versus self, human versus nature. These are pretty much the basic types of conflicts that you can have in a story. This can be tough to pull off, this one, and especially if you're having a story where sometimes the hero is going to alternate between heroic and villainous as the story goes on. So yeah, I have examples of The Babadook or Breaking Bad where at a certain point you're just like, oh, now I'm just rooting for someone else entirely. I'm hoping for someone to now get away from the person I've been rooting for most of the movie. So that can be really effective in horror. Jotul asks, what are my thoughts on Kiwoo in Parasite? Is Kiwoo the son? I can't remember which character is which in Parasite. It is him. What are my thoughts on him? Well, if I remember the movie, I don't remember who we open on. It's pretty much an ensemble. I guess he is sort of the most sympathetic of it's his story. Yeah, okay. So he's pretty much the most sympathetic of all of them. I mean, it does show the way that like he is the one that gets them all involved in their sort of scheme and heist scenario because he just wants to make extra money and it's just like an opportunity that he has. But the way that it compounds and it grows from there, it does raise some moral questions as to like, oh, is he actually such a good guy or not? It's a fascinating and flawed and really complicated character. I don't think I can talk too much about Parasite right now because I'd probably have to reread like a whole summary of the full thing to fully remember it. But yeah, some very interesting stuff done with who is a protagonist, who is an antagonist, who is the hero, who is the villain here. Movies by Bong Joon-ho, that director, often ask these questions like, who really is the villain of this story? Or like, are all the things that the hero has to do, are they going to be justified for defeating this villain? So yeah, I would look at his works for some just interesting case studies. I don't think I can get way too deep into Parasite at the moment, though. Let's look at AntiHero. So this is related to villain protagonist, but these are often cropping up in deconstructions of very traditionally heroic genres. Here are some examples. Who do we have here? Dexter, that's a deconstruction of the sort of police procedural. We have Ash Williams from Evil Dead, and in this one, in the third one, Army of Darkness, this is sort of a parody of epic fantasy stories. And then we have Catwoman over here, who is in the very traditionally heroic superhero genre, except all of them are sort of collections of traits that we would not normally consider to be belonging to heroes of their respective, origins. They might be ineffective or bewildered or deluded or apathetic or incompetent or kind of evil or nasty. Often they're just going to sort of be an amoral misfit, as this website puts it. What are some other examples of anti-heroes and characters that we like that are like this, that do act in heroic ways, but maybe have a lot of non-so-heroic traits as well?
I've used this example for like everything in all the classes, but The Unforgiven.
Unforgiven? Okay. So this is Will Money from that movie, so you mean, right?
Yeah. Ironically, it's kind of like he is a deconstruction of the Clint Eastwood archetypal man with no name, who already is kind of an anti-hero of like the classical Western. So it's kind of like triple layered in that way.
Yeah, the anti-hero.
Yeah.
But so what are the traits he has?
Because at the beginning, he's actually pretty like, I think at the it's kind of more like hero to anti-hero / villain protagonist, depending on your perspective. Because at the beginning, he seems pretty agreeable. He cares about his family. He's a little bit like, I guess, introverted, but he's like he has friends and stuff like that. Like he's not so anti-hero or like messed up or something like this.
Right, because he's a reformed villain at the start.
More
of the movie,
you show like throughout it shows like and then it kind of asks the question, as you said, is he the villain or is he not? Like even at the end, he's still kind of acting for a sort of justice, or it's just like, oh, look how freaking far he's gone.
Right, exactly.
Maybe he's went a little too far.
Yeah. But, So that character starts as a reformed villain who's kind of out of the game, and then through the course of the movie, he sort of is asking this question of, am I able to tap into my villainous instincts to use them for good, or should I just not even touch them because I might go too far, because I'm dangerous, because I scare myself, and because I've left that sort of version of me behind? So the question of, can he become a good person again, or does he have it in him to be a good person, makes up a lot of the thematic backbone of the entire story. Any other anti-heroes you guys like? We have a lot of these nowadays.
Daniel playing. Oh, sorry. You can go.
One of the more ironic ones you see is when cops are walking around with Punisher logos on their uniforms or on their guns, and it's like they're completely missing the point. In that, like, his villainous actions. I mean, he's a monster, right? Fighting for the quote-unquote good guys, even though, like, he's fighting for quote-unquote justice when justice has failed him, or something like that. You know?
Exactly. Punisher represents a failure of the system in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of the best stories with him are the ones where the other heroes on his side are like straight up afraid of him. Did somebody else want to weigh in? I think we had one more. Kendrick?
Oh yes, I was another character similar to Anton. Well, not similar, but sort of parallels. Daniel Plainview from the Paul Thomas Anderson film.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we have him here.
Oh, there, villain protagonist. Oh well, I guess
You could see him either way. So yeah, what are some traits that he has that are not so heroic, and how does he function as an anti-hero?
Well, he's the central character. He has the agency in the story. He often drives the plot parallel to the what's his name? The church character, the preacher character. Could you go back to the anti-hero slide quickly?
Sure.
Okay. Oh yes. Yeah, I think he was meant to be like. It's meant to be like a sort of take on. I hear PTA was influenced by a wide range of films. So, for example, Sierra Madre, and oh god, this is actually a tough one. I want to save time, so I'll just leave it there for now.
Okay, sure. Sounds good. So yeah, some good comments here, and yep, some good example characters. These are all going to be central characters in the narrative that might have some elements to them that would make them unpleasant or repulsive or non-heroic, but there still is something there that makes them worth watching, makes them compelling. And often it's going to come down to they're trying to do good things, or things that we would interpret or explain as good, either for slightly morally gray reasons, or otherwise they are using their bad traits, or they're doing villainous things in order to help people or to do something that we can ultimately understand. So there's a couple different ways that you can make these characters work. These are super common, and I think we mentioned superhero stuff a lot. Daredevil, Punisher, all these kinds of heroes that are a little bit darker or edgier, or have slightly more morally dubious methods. Very, very popular types of characters nowadays. So let's look at these different tiers of villains. And this is mostly going to be focusing on action-adventure type storytelling, but it's not exclusively. I mean, we can have these different tiers in almost anything. What are these different sort of tiers of villains, and how do they function? So we have the big bad, as we might call them, at the very top of the chain, which is often going to personify the anti-theme of the story in some fashion, like we were talking about this. Indiana Jones's sort of big bad is this guy who himself is an archaeologist, but their methods do differ in some kind of way. There is some point of divergence in their philosophies, and although look, they even have a similar hat, but one of them wears the white hat, one of them wears the brown hat, so like they have very clear philosophical and visual differences between them. These sort of big bad villains, they are often going to have minions underneath them. These henchmen are sort of the rank 2, or we could call them lieutenants or something like that. That these guys will thrive on this element of mystery or unique style, and often each of them will require their own unique tactic to defeat. So I think the James Bond series really thrives on these, because we have a lot of these sort of mid-level henchmen. Sometimes sometimes in the spy genre, we don't quite know who's going to be a henchman, who's going to be like a love interest, who's going to be a helpful contact to the main character. And sometimes we swap between several of those different roles for the same person. Not quite knowing who these henchmen are can be part of the story's plot sometimes. A lot of the times, you're going to want to just pick a couple very small and specific things to imply backstories for these mid-level lieutenants, because we just don't have that much plot time to spend with them, or scenes that can focus around them in a feature. The majority of your story scenes are going to focus on the main character, the antagonist, the central relationship, things like that. So you have to kind of be careful to say a lot with a little. Look for a small hook or gimmick for each one of these. Each one should be roughly the skill level of the hero by the time the hero encounters them, And usually we'll need to either defeat them or turn them good before we can take on the main villain. Very rarely will your hero take on the sort of central top-tier villain without having either defeated or turned the lieutenants to their side. And then we have this third lowest tier, the army of thousand ninjas, the mooks, as we might call them, giving these guys covered faces, which we see a lot in action stories, possibly because it makes it easier for the stuntmen to simply replay several different parts throughout the whole movie. They can have kind of a video gamey, not that realistic, not that grounded feeling to them if you cover up their faces especially. It leads to this kind of impersonal and sanitized and video gamey feel to these guys, and you can sort of see that that's why I think franchises like Star Wars actually do gravitate to characters like this, because a lot of Star Wars is sort of taking war and making it more fun, and certain franchises like Warhammer, things like that, where like we take just the cool, exciting, flashy, interesting parts of war and we leave a lot of the more complicated moral questions behind. I know there are still moral questions in Star Wars, but the question of should we shoot every single stormtrooper is never really one of them. Are any stormtroopers actually good? Does that ever come up? Well, sort of in the new ones, because Finn ended up coming from the Empire and being a stormtrooper, but that's the only time in 9 movies where that ever is even questioned a little bit. You normally don't even take their helmets off ever at all. So to the extent that it leads to this feeling of we don't really get as sad when a lot of these guys get shot or die. We can kind of throw whole teams of them at each other and just understand it and enjoy it as part of the backdrop of a larger battle. And you're not necessarily going to be raising as many questions about, the suffering inherent in all conflict or the cost of war. Star Wars is not really about questions like that as much. I mean, they come up a little bit, but it's more kind of just like taking war as a fun backdrop for a fantasy story rather than a serious examination of like the cost of bloodshed. So you can just think of there's going to be a cost and a benefit to sort of having this video gamey sanitized feel to your lower tier villains. If your hero is just carving through them without even blinking an eye, that can sometimes lead to this strange feeling, especially if we then later get to the main villain and your hero's like, no, I can't kill my opponent because that would be wrong. It's like, well, you killed 800 people to get here. It sort of seems strange that you would draw the line in the sand there. So do consider your villains' humanity and autonomy, and also their just like things that make them unique and things that motivate them and things that are causing them to do the evil stuff that they're doing. Like, it shouldn't just feel like it's there for no reason, or that they're just there to kind of cackle, or that they're coming out of a dispenser in the wall. They should have some kind of personality and weight to them. They shouldn't just be thrown entirely to the wind. Even these individual hordes of guys should have these moments where they feel formidable and specific and human. You can look at Shane Black movies especially for really great examples of random mooks or villains taking center stage. Venture Brothers is a series that does this to the extent that several random mooks actually are very common recurring characters throughout the whole series. You should know their motives, and they shouldn't just be ready to jump into the meat grinder unless they're fanatical or forced to for some reason. Like if there's one guy who's beaten up 100 of your friends, very rarely will you be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go give it a shot. So I know we see it in a lot of movies, but just be thinking carefully of ways that you can sidestep this problem and times that you can find for these characters to emerge from the woodwork and take center stage in the spotlight in your scene in such a way that creates these great moments. So just that's why you have to kind of be careful with the faceless horde approach. When it can make enemies seem sort of relentless and overwhelming, but it can become difficult to track the tide of fights and make them feel less real and more video gamey if it just feels like, oh, they're just going to keep coming. 1,000 ninjas are just going to keep breaking into this room until the generator shuts off and I stop having to fight them. So you need to find these moments for individuals amongst these hordes of villains to take the spotlight and create these emotional little bits. So like we have some examples here. We have this Nazi from Saving Private Ryan, a movie that does not have a central villain because it's a war film and it's all just going to be based on these little battles and vignettes where we are fighting just Nazi soldiers on the other side for whatever reason. They find all kinds of ways for individuals among them to stand out and create these really specific little battles or specific little stories within the battles. We have this stormtrooper from Force Awakens who ends up being very offended that Finn has left the stormtroopers and calls him a traitor and fights him with this energy stick thing. We have also this Yakuza swordsman from Kill Bill Volume 1 that we find this really nice moment in the battle for after the bride cuts his sword to pieces. She doesn't just slaughter him, she spanks him with the sword and says, "This is what you get for messing around with Yakuzas." And she sends him home, basically, which makes a nice moment for us to show our main character isn't just entirely a mindless killing machine. She can recognize that some of these villains are just, brought into this too young or brainwashed into it or anything like that. And that creates just a nice moment that we learn a little bit more about her. And we can watch her solve an interesting problem in an unexpected way. It wasn't a moment that we had to have, but it teaches us more about the protagonist. It's just funny, and it's just a nice moment that breaks up what otherwise would have been a monotonous fight of just, these guys show up, now we slaughter all of them. These guys show up, now we slaughter all of them. Having those little moments interspersed between, we might have to exchange words with one of the most of the villains, or they might try to run away, or they might try a different tactic other than just run up and die. So yeah, you always got to be finding modes and ways for even individuals from amongst a faceless horde to emerge and do cool, interesting stuff. Any questions on this or on anything we've talked about so far? Or specific examples of random henchmen that you've enjoyed? Here's a question from Niren. Thematically, is there a difference between a faceless uniform henchman like most Marvel movies or John Wick or zombies? What are some examples you can think of where the faceless henchmen have better developed characters? Is there a difference between a faceless uniformed henchman and a zombie? Not really, because, zombies are sort of an example of a situation like this where you would get away with having them be a little bit more mindless because that's part of the point of those characters, obviously. Yeah, sometimes the villains can just sort of feel like zombies if you treat them like that. Like, look at movies like Assault on Precinct 13, which is sort of like a Romero zombie movie, but with like gang members instead of zombies. And in that one, yeah, we do sort of lose a little bit of that humanity. What are some examples where the faceless henchmen have better developed characters? Well, I am thinking of first of all, Shane Black mystery movies like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, The Nice Guys are great at this. I will say Green Room is a horror thriller that I really like that has the sort of like, there's a bunch of bad guys that are going to come in one at a time and try to get our heroes, but they still have names, they still have personalities, they still feel really well-rounded and like they're doing what they do for a reason. They feel like they get scared or like they have to hype themselves up or like they have to, they feel like they have emotions a little bit more than most sort of hordes of villains do. So I'm going to recommend Green Room in particular from 2015.
That's the Patrick Stewart Nazi movie, right?
Yep, that's the one.
Great movie.
Yeah, so there is a big bad in that, but there's also, he has lots of subservient henchmen, and each of them feels like, yep, this is a person that exists in this world. They existed before the movie began, and assuming they would survive, would continue to exist after it ends. Here's a question. Do you think you could have henchmen as main villains and not show their boss at any point in the story without it detracting from anything? Yeah, it's kind of called Star Wars A New Hope, isn't it? Where we just have Darth Vader sort of represent the Empire for the majority of the movie. And we only see, like, do we glimpse the Emperor really, really briefly in that one? I don't think the Emperor actually emerges as a fully formed character until the later movies. So yeah, you can totally do this. Niren says any war movie. Yeah, usually war movies also, we're not actually going to be fighting the enemy general or whatever on the battlefield. You can absolutely have a subservient to higher evil be the main villain of the movie. And it can really do a lot to inform why they're doing what they're doing, too, because it's sort of saying that their loyalty to that villain might be in question for the movie, or it might form a big part of the movie's dramatic argument or thematic sort of arc, is questioning their loyalty to that villain, which, again, in Star Wars, we do as well, because, towards the end, are you going to stay loyal to the Emperor? It becomes a key part of Darth Vader's character. Domains and limitations. So, Freddy Krueger can only get you in your dreams. Diana from Lights Out can only show up in the dark, and some people mentioned Anton Chigurh before. He decides whom to kill and whom to spare via the toss of a coin. So, here I put it to you that limitations make villains more frightening, because moments of safety build dread. The audience cannot help but imagine what the villain is capable of when they are not inhibited by their governing rules. Can anyone else come up with any examples of limitations that make the villain, in fact, more intimidating?
Thanos choosing not to kill the Avengers right away.
Okay, I haven't seen that movie. Why does he make that choice?
He doesn't really want to kill people until he like splits the universe in half, really.
Okay.
Well, he wants to kill 50% of people, but he wants to do it at random when he can help it.
Okay, so
Like
in what
that's
way does
morality.
this? Okay, so this is a limitation to the character in the sense of he wants to make sure that it's completely random.
I think really it's twisted logic. He thinks that he's doing the universe a service by because he thinks that, I don't know, the universe is overpopulated, and he has like a MacGuffin called the Infinity Gauntlet that lets him do, I guess, anything, rewrite reality. So he's like, well, I'm gonna help everybody out by just killing 50% of the people and doing it at random. But really, that's the bigger thing, right? Just some kind of twisted morality, right? Some kind of self-rationalization of their actions.
Okay, so you're saying this moral code is his limitation in the sense that he's not just like, I'm going to kill everyone, like in the whole universe. I'm going to do this very specifically, this one rational way because I think it's the right thing to do.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So villains feeling like they must adhere to a certain code because it's the right thing to do can definitely be a limitation. We might wonder what they're capable of if that limitation were not in place, or if that rule were broken, or if they were unhinged in whatever fashion. What are some other good limitations that villains have that make them more formidable?
Some of it's like polite society, I guess, so to speak, or like an image they have to maintain.
Okay,
like for
who's
example,
a good example for that? Go ahead.
For example, there's like Gus Fring. Like when he shows up, it's like he's so polite and so like proper and cordial, and then only quite later on does that facade get removed, and then you realize, oh no, he's actually just like would like kill anyone as long as he could get away with it and it doesn't interrupt his image. So then from then on, it's like he does kind of have the limitation of he always tries to present a good image, but you like know he could do anything really against the protagonist.
Sure. Yeah, this makes sense. I think another villain that has that same sort of like air of politeness around them is Hans Landa from Inglourious Basterds. He's like super...
I was also gonna say the
Go ahead.
Calvin Candy from Django Unchained. So
similar sort of like they have a strong sense of manners and decorum and fitting into society, and then when that's removed, we see them become unhinged, crazy. So we are left to only kind of speculate for a lot of the movie, what's going to happen when the gloves come off, and that by the time it does, we're like sort of scrunched in our seats, like waiting for it, and we're anticipating it more, and it builds much more dread as to like, oh god, what is Calvin going to finally do when he feels all bets are off and politeness is no longer required. All right, good answers there. So yeah, domains and limitations make your villain feel more intimidating, more realistic, and builds dread. Jotul says, my concern is that they didn't directly show the Emperor being overcome in the end. I'm not sure Vader's arc would have been as effective. Is there a way you can do this effectively without making it a literal overcoming, killing the boss, like just walking away at the right time? Yeah, you can do this in all kinds of ways. You can just show... I think just showing them defying one of the boss's orders or expectations, or showing them start to make some kind of stand is all we really need. Like, we just need to see that the seeds have been planted. We don't need to necessarily see them overcome and murder their old boss to show that they've changed. Just show that they have broken some kind of rule. If they're like, I must do everything the boss says, if towards the end we see them, do one small thing that the boss didn't say to do, or do it in a slightly different way, that might show, okay, they're starting to make a stand, they're starting to make that key change. Nacho says, in some movies where a villain seeks revenge, they're limited to some super complicated plot because they want the extreme satisfaction of some specific outcome. Maybe that was an answer to a question that somebody asked. I'm not quite sure. Is this a question on its own? Or is...
Oh, no.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you were just asking about examples of
right.
villains that are limited by something. So.
Right, exactly. So they might have some super specific set of conditions of how they want to actually achieve their plan. That might be a limitation as well. Their goal might just be so multifaceted and so complicated that they're only happy with it if it plays out in just one kind of way. Definitely. Anyone else have any good examples of domains or limitations?
With Michael Corleone, would
Sorry, did you want to take that again?
sorry. I was gonna talk about Michael Corleone.
Okay, in terms of domains and limitations.
Yes, it's
Go
not, but the domain isn't like that he's powerful and that he wants to exercise power more. It's more like the potential power he has over his own family, and how in order to be more successful at maintaining the stability of his crime family, he would have to be prepared to hurt or even kill his own family members. So that's the sort of limitation. It could also be a moral one, not just like in terms of pure power.
Yeah, moral limitations will always be really big factors as well, especially if we're watching a villainous character get worse. Then usually it's going to be a result of them being faced with these moral tests and then making the wrong choice and then descending worse and worse. I think we saw Lou Bloom from Nightcrawler, which the arc of that character in Nightcrawler is the character gets worse and worse and worse over the course of the whole movie. His morals like decline, and the things that he's not willing to do, it starts getting pushed further and further down the dark path. Let's look at a couple more slides before we before I look at more questions. So horror and thriller villains, some tips here. So a lot of people have questions about the difference between horror and thriller villains and how to make horror, or just moreover, what is the difference between horror and thriller in general. I think that if you're looking at the villain design for both of them, you could sort of sum it up like this. Thriller is about there's a guy in your house and he has a gun. Horror is more about there's a guy in your house and he's crawling on the wall. And it's gonna come down to like a stronger emphasis on thriller villains. Thriller villains will more strongly emphasize cleverness and rationality. Even if it's a somewhat unhinged philosophical POV, it is at least one that makes some sort of sense to them. And a hint of sympathy as well. So I have some examples down here at the bottom. I have Forrest Whitaker's character from Panic Room. We have Rosamund Pike's character, Amy, from Gone Girl. And then I have Rebecca De Mornay's, the villain from The Hand That Rocks the Cradle down here. I can't remember the character's name. But what are some ways that, or what are some examples of thriller characters or thriller villains that have a hint of sympathy or rationality to them? And how does that make those characters work? Why would we want sympathy for the villains? How would that make a thriller villain better?
I mean, in some movies, I guess I'm thinking more like sort of slashers, but I would imagine there's some, I don't know. Are there some thrillers where we root for the villain more? I mean, it seems like more in a thriller, we're kind of like rooting for or maybe if they're all like really terrible people.
Yeah, if I think in some crime thrillers, for example, then it's like the villain might only be slightly worse than the hero in the first place. But we were just talking, or you just posted something about Amy from Gone Girl, right? Would you say that character has a hint of sympathy to her?
Yeah, I mean, I rooted for her the whole movie.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, I was like.
And why is that? I mean, what she's doing seems pretty bad, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it was like, I don't know how to explain it. It just seemed like maybe just because she's so clever, or something about like just, I guess, I don't know. It's like you kind of root for Ben Affleck's character as well, right? Like I don't know if you saw I Care a Lot.
I've seen it, yeah.
Which is also by Gillian Flynn.
I don't think it is.
I Care a Lot.
I think
Yeah,
it's the same actress.
Yeah,
Say that again?
it's written by no, wait. How did I know? I guess for some reason I thought she was involved, but anyways,
Just the same actress, I think.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, and that one it's like the the main, I mean, she's, this actress plays the main character, right? The protagonist. She's so awful. Like, I mean, it felt like it didn't feel like a villain protagonist. It felt like a movie about a villain who is, trapping old people and forcing them into nursing homes. And it's such a terrifying thing. Like, imagine you're hit with a legal guardian and you can't even, like, there's nothing you can do. You're forced to just do whatever this guardian says. And so it was very different from Gone Girl, right? Like, it felt like I was rooting for victims who were not even just like minor character, right? Like, so I don't know. I don't know where we were that, but I guess like
I guess the question. So what's the difference there? Like, I guess the difference is in Gone Girl. Why do we feel sorry for her in Gone Girl? Why do you root for her more? Is it because her husband is kind of awful, and her main point is that like, he shouldn't get to treat me like this, and that I deserve better than this. I deserve a life that is. I don't have to worry about him hurting me. I don't have to, like, she wants things that make sense to us.
Well, I think and part of it is there's a moment where, at least in the book, I'm not sure if this is a film as well, but where she sees her husband and she's like, oh wait, he really genuinely, like, loves me or something. And she's like, okay, now I got to change this whole plan and, like, go back and reunite with him. And it's like, it made a whole complicated plan, and then she's just gonna, like, undo everything that she did, or somehow, like, and like, all the things that she did, so complicated and, like, insane. Like, how did she pull all this off? I guess that's part of it, is just like admiring someone clever enough to do all these crazy things, right? Like, this complicated plan.
Right. And yeah, I think that what makes her a really effective villain in that movie is the fact that we have that cleverness, we have that rationality, we have her, she's doing it for reasons that we can understand, even if we're like, I wouldn't have solved that problem in that same way. But it's cool that someone could. Like, it's interesting to just watch someone put those things into motion. Whereas in I Care a Lot, she's like, I'm rich and I want to get richer, so I'm going to do that by abusing old people. It's like, it's harder to say that that's something that I also would want or would do. Yeah, thriller villains, we like them to feel more grounded because thrillers often are going to be more grounded in reality, not always. Horror, on the other hand, you would like to... A lot of the best ones will have this element of mystery or inscrutability. Like, we can see Michael Myers here. What are the elements of Michael Myers that are mysterious and inscrutable?
I've only watched, like, the first couple, so maybe it's wrong now in the canon, but it's never really explained in the first couple why he's, like, very, very strong.
Yeah, I mean, trying to piece together the canon of that franchise, you will have a bad time. Yeah, why can he do what he can do, essentially? I think the simplest answers are, he's 6'6", or whatever. But it seems like that character, at a certain point, I don't even know if this is intentional, but seems to be supernatural. Some other inscrutable things, well, I mean, we never see his face, right? That's kind of a big one. He only ever wears this mask. We never see what his face looks like, or learn why he feels the need to murder people, anything beyond. He's just evil. He's the evilest evil that's ever eviled. So we're left to wonder, okay, how did he get like that? Why is he like that? What, all these questions. He's mostly questions. And then we have characters like Pinhead from the Hellraiser franchise also, who, in fact, as the movies go on, we learn more and more about him. So we lose a little bit of this element of mystery and inscrutability. But for the first couple, we're like, oh, this guy... He seems to be following some kind of weird interdimensional rules. He's, like, not necessarily evil. He's just kind of a gatekeeper or the custodian of this kind of weird little puzzle box thing. So I think having all those mysterious elements about him, like just the visual mystery of why would anyone have pins all over their face like that? The horror characters a lot of the time the most memorable ones will be ones where we don't understand everything about them. And in fact, you must leave certain things up to be mysterious, because otherwise, if those things have answers, it will start feeling more grounded and like there are rules in place, and that this character can be figured out or defeated. The not knowing is a really powerful thing in horror. Take a character like Samara Morgan, for example, from The Ring. We know she is a little girl, and we know the basics of her of her powers, which were that she was adopted from overseas, and for some reason that we will never find out, she radiates powerful psychic imagery off of her at all times, which can drive people around her insane. So we know the specific effects of that, but we don't know why that is, or where she comes from, or what exactly Samara is, and we'll never really learn. The movie doesn't benefit from spelling it out. So yeah, with horror, you rarely will increase someone's fear of something by spelling out exactly what it is and where it comes from. Couple comments in the chat. Characters like Dr. Manhattan and Dr. Doom, who know their ultimate goal will help humanity. Dr. Doom knows that his actions are the only way to save humanity from extinction. Yeah, those can make really interesting anti-heroes when they're forced to do horrible things to sort of save the world or to protect humanity, even though humanity doesn't know that that's what's best for them or anything like that. So yeah, some fascinating stuff there. Let's look at this exercise called Design a Villain. I don't think we'll have time to do all of these, but I at least want to do a couple of them. So the idea here is that we're going to figure out who the hero is for one of these three stories at the bottom, and then we're going to fill in stuff on the opposite side to kind of balance them out and to design a character that is an inversion of the hero. So let's start with this first one here. Let's do a crime movie about a robbery. Who wants to volunteer?
I'll volunteer.
Okay.
It's a little bit blurry though, so could you read everything out for me?
Yeah. Can you read it if it's full screen?
Not the red dot. I can read upbringing, heroes upbringing, values, heroes values, methods, heroes methods. Nothing of the red dots.
Oh, it just says villains. Villains,
okay.
Upbringing, villains, values, villains, methods. Okay, I can only edit it if I have it at this size, unfortunately, but I'll make it big after we write it down. So let's start with a crime movie about a robbery gone bad. Who's our hero going to be?
So what's his upbringing?
Mm-hmm.
I guess he'll be like very lower class, very poor.
Is our hero a cop or a robber in this story?
Oh, okay. This is a heist story?
Yeah, a crime movie about a robbery gone bad.
I guess he'll be a poor cop.
Okay.
Why not?
So we have a cop raised in poverty. So for the villain, what we usually want to do is pick the same or pick the opposite. So what do you want to go with, the same or opposite for this one?
I think I'll go with that he's also grew up in poverty, okay. And the cop is like, oh, I grew up in this. You can't like just screw over the system because you also did this. And that's kind of their disagreement. Okay,
so is the villain a criminal in this one? Or,
yes.
Okay, so the villain is a criminal who grew up in poverty. So they both grow up in a similar... Yeah, this is often a good way to take it. They either have a shared background or they come from completely opposite ends. So if we have both of them raised in poverty, but one of them ends up being a hero, one of them ends up being a villain, we have a good start, a good foundation for the movie. So what are some values that the cop who grew up in poverty might have?
So kind of like we accept things the way they are and we stick to the straight and narrow.
You're sort of saying that he believes the system is what brought him out of poverty?
Yes.
Okay, so the system works.
If you follow the rules, you can kind of lift yourself up. That's what his values are.
Okay, the system works if you follow the rules. What would be the opposite of that perspective that the hero would get, or I'm sorry, that the villain would have adopted from having also grown up in poverty? Maybe he never got out of it.
And the villain is kind of more like, we get the cards we're dealt, and that's not necessarily fair.
So the system doesn't work. Life isn't fair.
Yes.
Okay, good. And last one, methods. So if we look at the method, the upbringing, and the value, so we have a cop that was raised in poverty that brought himself out of it by, honest work, by sticking to the rules, and by joining the academy. What methods does he now use as a result? Or what is his particular personal tactic that he uses to do his job.
So he tries his best to follow all like the regulations and laws that apply to police.
Okay, so he's very by the book. To the letter. And what would the villain's methods be?
I guess the villain kind of sees that, because he was dealt a bad hand, he kind of more has the quote-unquote right to cut a few corners.
Okay, so he's more of a trickster who cuts corners, abuses the system, and maybe highlights flaws in it. Oops. So yeah, sorry, that text is a little bit small. All right, so this is just an example here of how you might just design that basic dichotomy of the hero-villain, looking at this sort of seesaw method of this person comes from this, so this person comes from this. This person believes this, so this person believes this. And this isn't something that you always have to do, but it can be a nice way of just finding that ideological divide that's at the heart of the entire story. And this can be like a nice way for you to find what is the theme at the heart of all of this? Like, what is the theme that this conflict is bringing to the surface? What does this conflict kind of end up saying about the world? So, should we do one more? We can do a fantasy or a romance. What do you guys want to do? Somebody call it out and just claim one?
A villain for a romance story?
Okay, so we have a romance about a lonely woman sailing the high seas. She hits it off with a fishing captain. So let's start with our hero. Her upbringing, this is a lady sailing the high seas. What would be an example of what her upbringing might be like?
In a romance story?
Yeah.
Sailing the high seas? Okay. Well, there's Pirates of the Caribbean, that's one that just jumps into my mind. If we're talking, okay, woman sailing the high seas, I guess you could say she's she's leaving her comfortable environment to go somewhere far away.
Okay, so comfortable, wealthy upbringing is what you're saying? Okay, and so who's going to be the villain of this story? Is it going to be a rival for the affection of the sea captain, or is the sea captain himself going to be the villain? Who are you seeing as the antagonist of this romance story?
Assuming that the sea captain is the person they're going for, the rival in the story could be their first officer, right? Like the person, maybe the captain. I'm going off of that premise. Then the captain could be somebody who is deeply devoted to their work, or can't afford to be distracted. And then, in a way, she's like a distraction that he can't afford. And the first officer is sort of like the limiting factor here. That's just.
Okay, wait. So we're saying that the first officer is another woman that will be competing with our main character for the affection of the captain. Is that right?
No.
No.
First, I suppose I can't assume the preferences of our captain just yet. But let's just say the captain, the first officer is I was assuming he was a man, right? And he just thinks of the woman as some kind of distraction, right? Or somebody that's not good for. Maybe it's his dad. Maybe it's like the captain's the son, and his dad's like, that woman's not good enough for you. Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. This wasn't where I'd originally planned on taking this character, but hey, we're here now.
Okay, so the captain's dad is the villain?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what's his upbringing?
The captain's dad's villain?
If that's the villain of the story, then yeah, that's what we're doing right now. We're sort of designing the hero's traits or finding the villain's traits by identifying them in opposition to the hero's traits, right? So if your hero comes from comfortable, wealthy upbringing, it would probably be the same or the opposite for the villain. So what do you think?
Well, I would say exactly the same. I would say, if anything, more wealthy and is all about duty. Like maybe it's almost like a Tywin Lannister of sorts. Like it's all about duty and making sure you fulfill your role and obligations.
Okay.
So,
sounds
like
good.
that.
So, as a result of her comfortable, wealthy upbringing, I guess our main character is a woman who's trying to escape and see the world and broaden her horizons and things like that. So what value is really core to her?
to her. I suppose happiness. Let's go with that. Happiness. She cares more about being happy than she does about success because success is something that she believes she's able to find under most circumstances, but happiness is rare.
Okay, so maybe
So-
she abandoned like a fortune back on shore, or like a good business back on shore, something like that, because she's like, no, I'd rather go out and try to figure out who I am than have all this material wealth.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the opposite of that for the villain?
Well, it's the greater good in a way. So it's like, well, you can choose to be happy, but if you're taking down a lot of people with you, or if a lot of people depend on you, then focusing on your own happiness is truly the selfish thing to do. That's what I think this villain's vibe should be.
Okay, so values success or winning over happiness, and so when his son's ship picks up this weird lady off of the high seas, then he's like, my son can't get distracted from being the best fishing captain, or what is it? Yeah, fishing captain ever. We've got a quota to hit of salmon. You can't get distracted by random ladies.
Does it read somewhere on screen? Okay, it's like the screen's a big blur to me, so I don't know if this was like a prompt that was somewhere, like the fishing captain thing.
Oh yeah, it's on the sheet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I couldn't read it. I was like, where did that come from? That seems so out of the blue. Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, he has to be the best fishing captain ever. Maybe he's like, the last caviar fisherman in the world, right?
Okay.
It's like we're in Mad Max world, and he's got all the caviar, and he's like, we got to get this caviar to shore. Don't get distracted by this one.
Okay, and last question would be methods. So, as a result of her having a comfortable, wealthy upbringing that she has abandoned because she cares more about happiness than success, what method is the hero going to use to try to achieve her goal, which is the love of this fishing captain?
Maybe she's like, okay, well, maybe she's like an environmentalist, and she's like, don't, tear up the ocean and in search of, like be considerate. So maybe it's just like she's trying to get him to have like a better moral center than he's had to have had in his life so far. So just helping. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like maybe
Yeah,
he
I think
was,
so.
yeah,
So
maybe
she's trying to convince the captain to change his methods by seeing the world more like she does?
sure, why not?
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. So she's trying to convince the captain to change his methods. And I guess that sort of ties in with her values because, let's say, although he is the most successful caviar fisherman, he's causing lots of environmental damage, which makes her sad. Despite how successful they are. And what would the villain's methods be?
Well, assuming it's not just throwing the woman off the ship, then we'll go with he is, like there's nothing off limits in terms of what he will do in order to achieve his goals. But or at least he's not as worried about, he's more interested in himself than, or I suppose like his own interests than in the interests of the world at large, or something, or maybe not. Maybe it's like he doesn't give a damn about where the caviar comes from or how it gets there, so long as he can get as much of it as he can. So, what was the question? It was a method.
Yeah, we're looking at methods. So remember that this is a movie about a lady trying to get the fishing captain to fall in love with her. Is the villain's son, right? So what method is he going to use to keep that from happening?
Greed. Let's go with that. Greed. Just appealing to the captain's sense of greed and wanting more.
So appealing to his son's sense of greed. Yeah, maybe he walks while she's in the middle of trying to convince him, maybe you should try a different method that's more environmentally friendly and doesn't burn as much oil. He just walks into the room and like, hey, oh, by the way, just got a huge bonus from your last haul. Here you go. Yeah, that's the kind of money you can expect in this field all the time. It's not a special occasion. So anyway, enjoy. Oh, what was your new girlfriend just saying? Oh, to stop doing this? I don't know. So,
yeah,
maybe a passive-aggressive fishing dad. All right, great. Thanks for these answers, folks. So hopefully we can see just the even if you can't quite see the text, but you get the idea that we're by choosing traits for your hero, you are able to figure out almost mathematically what traits your villain will have, and vice versa. If you start with a villain, you're like, oh, they're going to be like this and this. You can then think, okay, if we balance the equation, then we have the hero embody the opposite of those traits, and thus create some kind of dynamic conflict that the answer of the question, which philosophy is sort of better, will be answered by the conflict of these two people in the movie. Because a lot of the time, by the time that the conflict is done, the loss of one or the other of them represents the sort of death or failure or futility of that philosophy. So let's look at proximity for our last 20 minutes here. So proximity, so villains function at different optimal distances from the hero. This means that they just have different levels of ability to combat or talk to or even perceive the heroes at any given time. So it's really difficult to pull off a story where the hero and the villain never ever meet or interact ever at all, though it can be done. Can you guys think of any? We did mention No Country for Old Men, which is close. They don't ever like see each other face to face in that one, but they do end up sort of shooting it out a little bit. So, not quite. Are there any stories where the hero and villain never even meet or interact at all?
Well, I suppose there's any war movie where, you know, it's like one faceless person shooting at another faceless person, right? Or some kind of yeah, there's that. There was a movie that came out, I think last year with like Jake Gyllenhaal. That was like a remake of a Swedish movie where he was a 911 operator. Yeah, that's the one. And then technically they do see each other, but that's only at the very, very, very end of the movie, which is Day of the Jackal, where it's actually like the whole point of the movie is like the hero, quote unquote, the investigator doesn't know the identity of the jackal and is trying to track him down. So
yeah, mystery movies might have a little bit more of this just because it's like a lot of the time they're trying to figure out who of their suspects the villain even is. So they might be interacting with them without even knowing it. But yeah, most of the time the hero and villain have to meet and interact at least occasionally, and the movie's often going to be at its best when it's happening as often as possible, head to head, particularly throughout the second act and the climax. Almost always, the hero will confront the villain at the climax and will either win or lose, the death of one or the other signifying the death, wrongness, or futility of the loser's ideology. Death, it doesn't have to be death, but the defeat of one or the other representing the defeat or futility of the loser's ideology. Even if the main character is portrayed as the morally correct one in whatever way, and they lose, then the statement that the movie might be making would be, oh, it's futile to have that philosophy because even being in the right is not enough to win this conflict, or something like that. So let's look at some different distances of villain. We'll start with the farthest away. We can call this distant evil. So Dark Lords, powerful corporations and syndicates and manipulators who are pulling the strings. You can see a couple of examples I've thrown up on here of Sauron, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, or Samara from The Ring, which I mentioned earlier. So these characters are generally just not that complicated, and they can't really be that complicated because they don't have that much screen time. They don't really develop or interact with others. They probably don't ever change, and their motivation might be as simple as they are evil. Therefore, more often than not, they're going to operate through a series of more memorable agents, such as Saruman or the Nazgul for Sauron, omens, such as the progression of Samara's curse throughout the Ring movie, or other remote, some kind of remote manifestations of their will, like the henchmen in the different Mad Max movies that are all decorated in accordance with their different gang leaders, all of which will carry the mark of their big bad's kind of personality. Some tips for using this distant evil: make sure that the mark of this personality is pretty strong and consistent amongst all their different servants, and that their different servants are going to they're going to carry the majority of the weight of the, like, all the other stuff that we're looking for that makes characters compelling. You know, this perhaps hint of rationality or sympathy or these things can be distributed amongst their followers, so we don't really have to worry about developing the distant evil very much. This works better in sort of fantasy, sci-fi type stories for the most part, but can work in real life in terms of, you know, corporations or armies or any of these things. Those can all sort of make sense. But yeah, just it's going to mostly come down to who are the people that serve this distant evil, because more often than not, it's going to be something that has to be overwhelmingly powerful in order for us to believe, okay, all your heroes are going to be against this thing, even though they aren't facing it head to head. They're going to have to, you know, find some way to defeat this overpoweringly difficult enemy. Any other examples of distant evils that you guys are a fan of? Okay, perhaps not. Let's go to our next slide here. Subservient to higher evil, which is something we've mentioned a little bit today. We have lackeys and lieutenants and sidekicks. Darth Vader works for the Emperor. Gretchen Wieners reports to Regina George. This is Bud from Kill Bill, who works for Bill. Often the reasons surrounding their loyalty, as I think I mentioned this earlier too, is a key part of the movie's theme, and the result of their struggle with that bond makes one of the movie's key dramatic arguments. So it's whether it's Gretchen or whether it's Darth Vader or Bud, like watching them struggle with, do I want to continue working for this bad guy, despite the fact that the hero might be trying to turn me good or might be trying to turn me away from this villainous path? That is often going to be at the heart of what the movie is in fact about in the first place. So these are all good things to look at, not just for if this is your overarching, if your big bad is subservient to some higher big bad. This might just be the sort of mid-ranking villains of your story. This rule of their struggle of, or this idea of their moral struggle or their struggle of loyalty to the villain representing sort of the core of the movie, or like a key idea of the movie, that can be something that reflects the hero's kind of journey too. Or the question can be, for instance, like, why isn't the hero loyal to the villain when there's all these reasons they should be? So the sort of subservient character is often like an argument for why someone would fall to the villain. Like Darth Vader. Why does Darth Vader work for the Emperor?
The dark side.
The dark
The
side.
Force.
Yeah, the dark side does what?
Well, that's a great question. Whatever the writer needs it to do.
Pretty much, yeah. But I guess why does Darth Vader specifically care about the dark side, or why is that relevant to him?
Well, at first it was, hey, my wife is pregnant, and I want to save my wife, but then I end up killing my wife. So that's not the case. But I guess after that, it's like, well, I'm not powerful enough to take the Emperor. I hate the Emperor, and I hate everybody and everything. So at that point, it's he's pretty much just like not able to stand up to the Emperor, so he might as well do his bidding. And
right. And I think he's also been sort of seduced by having all this power. So like the point is that the dark side offers you seductive and addictive powers. Is that something that Luke is also struggling with?
Yeah, for the fifth and the sixth movie, to an extent, that he's fighting against the vengeful part of his nature.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. The dark side is like something that can affect anybody, and the main character struggle with it is like one of the main themes of the franchise. So by having Darth Vader exist as like an argument of, this could be somebody that you could become if you fail, you could end up being just as loyal to the Emperor as I am. That makes that villain like just a symbol of the entire sort of antagonistic force of the entire series, and it just makes like a really clear dramatic argument for the whole movie. But yeah, good answers there. Subservient characters pretty common in big sci-fi, fantasy, and adventure type stories that have a large cast. More often than not, the villain will not be working on their own and actually need like some kind of network of servants of some kind. So you will very frequently find ways to play with this. Let's talk about the switcheroo. So the switcheroo, this is like a betrayal or a surprise or the result of substantial character arc that can cause one character to reveal themselves as the true villain, to supplant a different one, or to otherwise just change sides. So what are some ways that we can make this work? And you can see the examples I have up here. I have the forget his name, but the main villain from Minority Reports. We have Barbossa from Pirates of the Caribbean. We have, I think it's Stu from Scream, and then Rose from Get Out. What are some ways we can make this work? Well, we can build trust first for a character to amplify the impact of their later betrayal. This is really key. One, you can have them address the audience's first obvious suspicions in such a way that, remember in Get Out, the part where Rose is like, you know what, we should just leave. My parents are being so rude and I can't believe it. We should just go. and forces Chris, our protagonist, to be the one to say, no, you're right. I don't want to cause a scene. I don't want to be the reason we had to leave, so no, we can stay. So make him be the one to convince her to stay is a nice way of allaying a bit of the suspicion. Stu from Scream, remember, he gets arrested for the murders early on, after they think that it's him who's doing it, and then another murder happens while he's in jail. So it's like, oh, well, it couldn't have been him, obviously. And later on, we even see him get stabbed by the killer. And we're like, well, there's only one killer, so there's no way that it could possibly be him. But then later on, he gets up and he's like, oh, no, it was fake blood. I'm working with the killer. There's two of us. That's sort of like the big twist at the end of Scream. But we built that trust by saying, one, he's been arrested and punished for it before. Like, we sort of already considered him as a suspect and written him off. Then we see him get stabbed. So, like, there are no other victims there are no other people in the movie we've seen get stabbed that later turn out to have been villainous. So we can assume, oh no, he was just another victim, and it was the result of my misplaced suspicion. So we can do lots of these little things to dissuade, or what do we say? To counteract the audience's suspicion even early on. You can also make it seem like they're progressing towards some other reasonable objective in the background. If it seems like they're only lurking around to backstab someone, we'll see it a mile away. What are some other ways that we can build trust for a character so that their betrayal carries more weight?
Well, you're saying build trust in a character, but that's really what it is, right? The trust is only built through time, so through shared experiences, like whatever that is. It's like if you're wanting to get like a one-off character where it's like they are seemingly trustworthy, then are being lured into a honeypot, maybe to get robbed, or you can go the longer route where you have a character and their best friend, and then the best friend is given the opportunity to right some wrong or obtain some kind of power, and will be convinced that screwing over their friend is the way to attain that power. Both of those are successful examples that I could see. But they're kind of ultimately going off the same thing. It's just lulling people into a sense of security.
Sure, yeah, we should be. Make your character feel more safe around this villain. Make it seem like your character will confide in them and trust them, because if your character trusts the villain, then we also are more likely to. Watching them grow closer together, watching them go through, like you said, experiences together, watching them struggle against some other villainous force, watching them have to cooperate and collaborate. It might make it seem like our hero and that character that will end up being evil are building some other relationship. Like it feels like we're setting up some other arc with them. We're going from indifferent to friends, perhaps, something like that. So it can totally catch us off guard. And if you pull the rug out later and say, no, that was kind of a red herring. What's really going on is this has been a friendship to antagonist arc the entire time. Okay, so how about this one? Encountered occasionally when dramatically appropriate. This is sort of the middle standard level of proximity where it's like they're going to show up every couple scenes. This villain might be gaining power, though, or changing in some way throughout the story. It works really well if they're, in fact, gaining power throughout the movie, because that just adds a really natural ticking clock, doesn't it? Like the xenomorph in Alien starts out as a little baby alien, and then it grows bigger, and it gets new abilities and powers and becomes more dangerous as it grows. This works well for horror and action, though it's nice in action if the hero and villain have some kind of method, or at least several chances to communicate throughout. I mean, Die Hard kind of really set the standard for how dramatic and interesting this can be, which is just give your hero and villain a walkie-talkie that they can communicate between, even as they're working against each other. So we get to see their great personalities bounce off each other, and the quippy, fun protagonist versus the serious, really nasty, evil villain character. So we can watch the contrast. Just the more they interact, the more we can build out and develop both of them. Often these villains are going to be more on the same level as the hero if they're going to encounter them every couple scenes. Like if they're really far away, distant, sort of shadow in the clouds kind of thing, they're going to probably be overwhelmingly powerful. Whereas if your hero's going head to head with them every once in a while, they're going to be a little closer to the hero's abilities. Though they should always have the edge in terms of resources and support, relationships, everything. So even if the villain has many henchmen, the hero should still, in this kind of story, usually be forced to go face to face with them at least once, probably multiple times before the final battle, to showcase their power and to demonstrate what the hero needs to overcome. So think Agent Smith from The Matrix, where we come face to face with that villain many times throughout the story. Most of the time, they have to just escape from him, just fight him off as much as you can, then get out of there, because he is just exponentially more strong and fast than them and everything like that. So by the time that the hero finally takes a stand and says, no, I'm not running away from Smith anymore, we understand he's gone through a significant growth and a significant change. And the fact that he sticks it out until he defeats Smith shows that Neo has, he now believes that he is the one. Hero and villain as friends. This one's pretty tricky to pull off, but you can totally do it. In this one, they might truly want what's best for each other, and they might just sort of disagree on the ways to achieve it. One might be secretly working against the other, or both might be aware of the conflict, but the dissolving of or the attempt to preserve that relationship through this conflict can make up a key part of the story. In sitcoms and repeatable, episodic stories like TV shows, things can usually still end up going back to normal. By the end of the episode, no matter how bad things get on an episode-by-episode basis, which is a little bit unrealistic in the terms of if people did the kind of stuff that friends do to each other on Seinfeld and Always Sunny and Peep Show in real life, they would probably not continue to be friends for very long. But in the world of TV comedy, we can kind of understand, okay, they got over it, now things are back to how they were before. The big difference here is going to be when it comes to features. Because in a movie, a hero and villain as friends rarely lasts the entire movie because it just provides too much emotional payoff to watch it fall apart to justify not having it fall apart. So look at a movie like The Social Network or Jennifer's Body, where that division between those two main characters as frenemies or as friends who have some kind of conflict or divide between them is going to really be at the heart of the entire thing. Schindler's a kind of a weird anomaly because the hero and the villain are friends, and one of them is secretly working against the other, but I don't think the villain ever really catches on, or that they ever end up actually kind of going head to head. We could maybe blame that partially on the fact that it's a true story, and you're to some extent limited by what really did happen with those actual public historical figures. But that's not entirely true, because I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff happens in that movie that didn't really happen in real life as well. So you just have that. I look at that one kind of as an odd anomaly, where even though there's never a final kind of conflict or confrontation in that movie, there's enough else going on in Schindler's List that the movie works really well even without that. But it's very difficult to pull off a movie where there's no final head-to-head moment between your hero and villain in which the defeat of one sort of indicates the loss, death, or futility of that person's worldview. Okay, we're in the last 5 minutes of class. I want to just go over a couple slides like how to enroll and things like that, and we'll take questions up until the end. So remember, you can buy ScriptCamp access by going to scriptcamp.net/classes and just buying whichever class you want, or you can get unlimited membership. Comes with a 2-week free trial. You can get into as many classes like this as you'd like. All our labs, all our workshops, all our boot camps, everything. We have TV Pilot Bootcamp coming up on May 15th. That is going to be our first class here, so make sure to come by and start working on your logline for your series and for your pilot. So you're going to have the whole 6-week course to write from beginning to end, either a half-hour or full hour-long pilot. Will help you through every step of the way. It's basically how to write a pilot 101. Upcoming stuff. So this today was villains. We have classes with Nacho on Thursday and on Wednesday of next week, where he'll go into... He's going on the topic of copyright and options and licensing. I'm doing another brand new class on theme next week on the 19th. And then you can see all the other options here. These are all of Nacho's other classes, which are going to be on things like the beginning of story, outlining, exposition, action, dialogue, endings, scene work, and characters. So many different opportunities here at ScriptCamp, and even with basic membership, you get 8 2-hour-long interactive live classes every single month. Here's some more details on what each of these different options of membership include, which I've gone over before, so I won't do too much right now. But remember, unlimited comes with the best value, and we also have coverage options. You get $100 off of these if you are an unlimited member, but coverage is basically a full written response to your script, evaluating it for many different factors. Consultation includes a 30-minute call as well, and we have proofread options too, so feel free to look at those. We have table reads Sunday, May 15th at 2 p.m. You can submit a 5-page short. To submit your features or pilots, you can spend 100 script coins, which we can go over in just a second. But the deadline for this is midnight, May 13th. And you can come to the server, read out the pilot, or read out the pages with a group of people and get good responses and feedback. Script coins, remember to type $store into any chat channel and you'll see how many coins you have and how to spend them and stuff. But these are kind of our little reward system that you get just by participating in activities and classes. You will earn up, a bank of these coins that you can use to purchase these little items and also table reads, memberships, and things like that. So yeah, $store in the chat. We have lab this Saturday, 4 to 6. It's like office hours. You can come by with whatever questions you have, whatever topics you want to hear more about, or up to 5 pages of whatever you'd like if you'd want me and other pros to review it. Free t-shirts. You can send Nacho a message with your size and location, and you can get a ScriptCamp t-shirt if you want to support us and just spread the word. Speaking of spreading the word, we have a referral program too. You can refer a friend and they will get a discount on their membership, and you will get a free month. You can do this as many times as you want. All right, what's next at ScriptCamp? So I mentioned the lab and table reads this weekend. We also have workshops and classes every Wednesday, Thursday, 4 to 7 Pacific time. Sorry, that's 5 to 7 Pacific time, I believe. At least for today it was. Then we have Pilot Bootcamp coming up. We have Rewrite Saturdays, Feature Fridays. All right, that's everything we have going on here. Let me open this up to questions on anything that we talked about today for our last few minutes, and then we'll call the end of class. What would you guys like to know? Or what are you still wondering after this course? I'm going to scroll up in the chat a little bit. Nacho asked, could have the villain seem to save the main character in an earlier scene? Okay, this is in response to the question of how to build trust for a character. Yeah, that's a great way to do it. Have them... Here, let me bring up the chat here. How to make them save the main character or help the main character early on. Make it seem like their motivations or their rationale is on the good side. Chotul says, what's the best example of a villain I can think of, or what's a favorite? So based on the slide I had at the very beginning, those are some that really stand out to me as ones that I like a lot. I have Percy Wetmore from The Green Mile, although he's really only a villain in that he gets in the main character's way. He's not necessarily directly opposing what the main character is trying to do. He is one of probably the most hated characters in all of fiction for the very effective reason that he just feels so kind of realistic in his awfulness. He's petty and a little bit sadistic and just wants to throw his power and weight around. And I think that especially in recent years, we have seen a lot of response in this culture towards figures of authority who abuse their position of authority. So watching someone who embodies all the worst of that is just really, really, it activates those hate parts of your brain really well. And he also feels real. I mean, we have a really clear scene that shows he's just as afraid and cowardly as the worst of them. He's no better than any of the prisoners here. He's just kind of like a little kid in an adult body, but he just does worse and worse and worse and worse stuff throughout that by the end you feel like, I can't wait to see this guy get his justice and punishment. So yeah, I think really, really wanting to see them be taken down is a very essential part of what makes a great villain. So look for characters that you're like, I had to watch the next episode because I had to see them get destroyed. Niren says, is there such a thing as a true villain, like a person or character who made a choice to cause harm or destroy, or are they all victims of circumstance? I don't mean upbringing. Would you consider like Ted Bundy a victim of the psychology? So these are interesting philosophical questions, like is anyone actually responsible for doing evil things, or is everyone just sort of a product of nature, nurture, or some combination of those? I mean, it's a complicated question that people have spent their entire lives, and whole religions and whole books have been trying to figure this out. But I would say in terms of movies and in terms of storytelling, you can absolutely have someone that's just evil or is just bad and we'll never really know why. We were talking about Michael Myers earlier on. These characters totally work in stories. It helps if the characters themselves, like the protagonists and central, other people are also struggling with that same question. They're also wondering, like, how could someone be that evil? Like, why would anyone do that? Because then it sort of seems more like it's something that's inherent to your world, and it's less just seeming like you, the author, are saying, well, some people is just broke. Some people are broke, and that's the end of the story. If the characters themselves are grappling to understand it and trying to understand it, then that can be a really big part of what makes those characters work. Look at any of those sort of overwhelming evil characters, and having anyone else in the whole story call out and acknowledge, wait, no one should be like that. Why? How are they that bad? There must be something else going on here. I don't get it. That's usually really a key part to how those characters function and why we accept those stories. It's because, like, if even the characters in the world can't reckon it or wrap their heads around how someone can be that bad, then we sort of get a little more where we're like, okay, that doesn't just feel like a cop-out from the writer. Other questions? Anything you guys want to know about villains? Or things that you have wondered? Or topics that you think are pertinent to villain writing? Here's a question. Maybe a better question, says Calfredo. Are there people or characters that will always be evil under any and all ways their lives could have played out? Oh gosh, that's like a determinism versus free will kind of question now, isn't it? I think that are there people or characters that will always be evil in any way that their life could have played out? I mean, there are certain disorders and certain like mental issues that cause people to be particularly aggressive or to not have as strong a sense of considering other people's feelings or things like that. So by that objective metric, I guess, yes, they will, if those brain conditions exist, then no matter what conditions you're born in, you will always have that, and you will always be a little meaner, a little less considerate than those around you. I think that it's just like a complicated philosophical question that doesn't have one right or wrong answer.
The reason,
go ahead.
So the reason I ask though is because when I see something like evil kids, like you'll see the list that the FBI has put together of kids who have been found like torturing animals or doing some other egregiously evil thing, right? Where they have no perhaps inbuilt sense of right and wrong. And like those are some of the characters I've seen people play with in like serial killer horrors, or sometimes it'll be like a much more dark and grim setting that, they just happen to find this space to flourish. And, but like, I don't know, it's one of those things that I wonder about, like, can you really consider somebody to be born bad, just like out of the gate? Does that actually exist, or is that just sort of a construct of storytelling?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a great answer for it. I think it's a great question to explore in a movie, and certain movies do try to explore questions like this. You should watch We Need to Talk About Kevin, which is a movie that is all about that idea. And what are some other if anyone else has recommendations for stories that address this question of are you just born evil or not, we'd be glad to hear them. Halloween sort of gets into this, not really, but it touches on this idea of this kid who was destined to always be bad or evil. Hellboy is about this question. Like, lots of fiction I think tackles with this, and yeah, I don't have just a great simple answer for it, but it's something that you can clearly explore in fiction really effectively.
I would say even like Megamind is kind of that question.
I haven't seen Megamind. I believe in that he's kind of a sympathetic supervillain that his hero dies, so he like takes over the world, right?
It's a comedy, an animated comedy that's like, well, I'd say it's for all ages, but like it's supposed to be that kids can watch it, so it doesn't like go super, I guess, like philosophically deep into the question. But it is like, oh, because he's an alien and because he's kind of has like that kind of eccentric genius also, he's just like grew up as a bad guy even though he never really made the choice. Yeah. And then like in the like his arc is like in the middle, he literally says, like, it's a little on the nose, but he literally does say like, oh, I don't want to be the bad guy anymore. Like in a confrontation with his sidekick character who's like a minion who's like, oh, we're all about being bad, why are you not bad anymore?
Yeah, or what's it called, Wreck-It Ralph kind of gets into this too, doesn't it? Where
it's
just because you're the bad guy doesn't mean that you are a bad guy. So yeah, lots of great room to explore this in storytelling, I think.
Yeah, I had another question about so it seems like pretty intuitive how to balance like kind of the henchman characters with the one big bad. It's kind of like okay, you defeat like the lieutenants and then you fight the big bad usually, and turning the lieutenants to your side or defeating them or whatever. I'm a little bit more confused, or not confused, but have a little want to know a little bit more about balancing antagonists that aren't necessarily connected. Like, for example, in the Green Mile, there's Wild Bill, who is actually pretty much on the opposite side of Percy, even though they're both like, one is supposed to be pure evil and then the other is like kind of petty, envious evil, right? But they like, actually one is used to kind of defeat the other, so to speak. But kind of, I'm pretty sure Wild Bill isn't even introduced into what would be the premise scenes, but I can't really remember. But yeah, kind of balancing, and like for that one, I can't really, without looking at it closely, identify who is like the main antagonist in that scenario.
Yeah, well, The Green Mile is super hard to classify in all kinds of reasons. It's one of those movies that that don't 100% understand how the structure works, or a lot of things about it, but it does. I mean, it's a very episodic story. So we might look at different characters being the villain of certain sections of that story, but it's not like, I mean, the main character's goal is basically just continue to run the prison normally, I guess. So that one is hard to break down for a lot of reasons. Can you maybe restate the question in a little bit, just like one concise sentence terms?
Yeah, I guess just using normal structure, what is a good way to balance multiple villains that aren't like,
okay,
that aren't in a hierarchy? Like, for example, in Batman movies, there's Two-Face and the Joker, right? And of course, Two-Face is villain turned hero, but there's like a lot of villains sometimes in superhero movies.
Yeah.
Well, they're not necessarily connected. Sometimes they're on different sides.
Right. Well, so yeah, there's gonna be different ways that can work. A lot of the time, it's gonna be like the hero has to defeat one of the villains in order to defeat the other, and the first one that they have to defeat represents them overcoming their own personal problems, and then the second villain represents some force that they would not have been able to defeat unless those personal problems were taken care of. So let's look at, I don't know, this is how little I keep up with these movies, but Spider-Man 3, right, which I know is not exactly a fantastic movie or a great example to use, but who are the villains in that one? It's Venom and it's the Sandman, right? And in order to defeat the Sandman, he first has to defeat the Venom, which is a little bit more close. Oh, actually, aren't there 3 villains in that movie? Because we have...
Yeah.
okay, maybe not a great...
I can't even remember who it is.
It's Harry...
Harry.
Osborn is
He's actually more the main villain.
Yeah, so
Sandman is like so secondary.
Yeah, I don't even remember how Sandman even plays into that story. But regardless, maybe you can just like use that as a broad, like, don't take that specific script as the example, but it's the sort of thing where it's like, first he has to destroy his personal problems. So first he has to defeat the black suit thing, and that's going to represent him, overcoming his flaw. And then now that he has done that, he is going to have the tools that he needs to take on the grander villain. That's just like one way it is sometimes done.
So working that into structure, both like kind of defeating the, I guess, demon villain that's not like the grander villain would be like after the realization that all is lost, or after realization and pit of despair, like break into 3. Sorry,
it could be. Yeah, I mean, pretty often it's either going to be the midpoint or the break into 3. The break into 3 would be a great spot for them to be like, oh wait, I've been so selfish this whole time. I can use that to defeat this villain, bang, and now I have all the tools that I need to go fight the main one. But yeah, lots of different ways to do it. We are a little past time, so I'm just going to take this one last quick question before I call it off. Joe Toole has asked, what's another good example of a cop-like figure who is rich and a criminal who is poor movie? Like a relationship between Killmonger and Black Panther. Feel free to weigh in on this one. I'm going to try to think of an example. Maybe in Training Day, I can't remember the exact origin story of Denzel Washington's character, but maybe that's an example. I think I might have to get back to you with more examples of this. That's just a very specific thing to think of, unless you guys know. Niran says Dune. Haven't seen Dune, so couldn't say, but maybe that answers, maybe that works for you. I don't know. Okay, so we are 10 minutes past, so we do have to call it. But these are very good questions. Sorry, I don't have an answer to the last one. So thank you all for coming, everybody. Nachos's Departed or Infernal Affairs. Yeah, another good one to look at. So let's call it for now. Remember, please enroll if you've enjoyed this class or want to do more of these. You could just get the basic if you want to just do the weekday classes, or if you want boot camps, labs, and all that great stuff. Please sign up for unlimited free trial at scriptcamp.net/membership. And TV Pilot Bootcamp starts soon, May 15th. That's in just 4 days. So hope that you guys sign up for that, and hope to see you guys at something soon. Thanks so much for coming by. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend.